Donald Trump is being sentenced today in his hush money election interference case. Now, the proceeding will take place in a Manhattan court and comes just 10 days before Trump is sworn in for his second term as president. Meanwhile, Trump's request to have the sentencing stopped was rejected by the Supreme Court yesterday. Joining us now to break down what's next is criminal defense attorney Eric Faddis. Eric, good to have you with us. Welcome.
Good to be with you.
So Trump is likely to get what's called an unconditional discharge. What exactly does this mean under New York state law?
Yeah, so this is an interesting option that New York state judges have. Now, the convictions carry up to 4 years in prison, up to $5,000 fine. But if the judge looks at the nature of the offense and the defendant's circumstances and believes that neither the ends of justice nor the public interest will be served by jail or probation, they can just give zero punishment at all. And so that's essentially what an unconditional discharge is. And Judge Marchand has said that that's what he is likely to issue.
I think some would say, well, why not just dismiss the case or the charges rather than going through these formalities? Because if you look at the ruling from the Supreme Court yesterday, even they think, and with Judge Marchand basically announcing prior to that there's not going to be a penalty here, it just seems like even the Supreme Court was like, this is just a formality, just let him go do it.
Yeah, a fair amount of people are saying that. You know, when we look at like a rule of law argument, if someone is convicted of a crime, typically they have to be sentenced. There's no exception to say, hey, these circumstances suggest that we shouldn't go to sentencing. So it's sort of a rule of law argument, and it allows for finality and for the appeal to proceed.
But when you say when someone's convicted of a crime, there needs to be a sentencing, I think there are some people out there who will be like, well, if that was me, I'd probably be sentenced to a penalty. But because it's a man, a man who's a billionaire and who's now president-elect, you know, he gets off scot-free.
You know, I've never seen a case in which someone was convicted of dozens of felonies and receives less than a slap on the wrist. He's receiving no punishment whatsoever. Now, of course, he is differently situated than pretty much any criminal defendant ever. And I think that that is really the circumstances that led to Judge Marchand issuing this eventual decision.
And what does that do to the overarching thing, I guess, with anyone in the general population? You know, we talk rule of law a lot, and, you know, the Trump camp has constantly talked about witch hunts and two tiers of law. I mean, this is the definition of a two-tier justice system.
You know, certainly some folks are saying there is a clear double standard here. Trump's folks are arguing that, hey, he is different than any criminal defendant. He is going to be the president-elect, and any kind of sentence, whether it be incarceration or probation, would substantially inhibit his ability to discharge his duties as president, which will start in about 10 days.
And were you surprised? I mean, even the Supreme Court, as I mentioned, they, I think, alluded to the fact that this is more of a formality than actually really needing to rule on something like this. But were you surprised, even under those terms, that they came back 5-4, not in his favor?
I was a little bit interested in the split. That's something I didn't expect coming. But they do address Trump's arguments, and they essentially say, hey, Trump, you can appeal in New York state courts. You can go through the normal process that everyone has to go through. You don't just get to go immediately to the Supreme Court and try to have your sentencing thrown out. And so I think it was ultimately the right decision by the Supreme Court.
And as far as what's next after this sentencing today, immediate appeal. And hey, I know he's not appearing. He'll appear virtually. He has the opportunity to speak. Will he speak, or is it just kind of take this little slap on the wrist and move on to the appeal process?
You know, when we're talking about Trump, you know, he takes really almost any opportunity to advocate for himself and to speak. And so it would be not surprising if he chose to speak. In terms of what's next, you know, the felony conviction does prevent him from serving on a jury, from possessing a firearm. And then on top of that, the appeals will proceed in New York State Court, and that could take likely years.
Gotcha. All right, criminal defense attorney Eric Faddis. Thank you, Eric. Good to talk with you.
Good to be with you.
All right.